Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 114 of The Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Longtime listeners to the program will note that we like to learn from individuals all over the world. And that, of course, includes both subject matter experts as well as those with lived experiences. I was taking a peek at my podcast download analytics the other day, and I was tickled to see that we have dedicated listeners from all over the planet. In addition to you fine folks listening here in the United States, we have listeners from the United Kingdom, Australia, Ireland, and Canada. Thank you all very much. But our reach goes beyond those nations, as we have downloads that stretch around the globe to places like Finland, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Romania, Spain, Sweden, Belgium, France, India, Israel, Lithuania, and let's not forget our friends in Switzerland, Hungary, Slovenia, Serbia, the United Arab Emirates, Portugal, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Nigeria, and Iceland. And even if there's only a handful of you out there, a shout out to those of you listening in Croatia, Denmark, Indonesia, Luxembourg, Mexico, Uruguay, Italy, Costa Rica, and Jamaica. Of course, what I love about this is the fact that I consider this a worldwide community. Those of you who are familiar with communities of practice are aware of the utility of peer-to-peer learning. And that is what we are all about here on the Criminologist podcast. Which is why I am so excited to be bringing you my next guest. Julie Truschel has been in the field for over 30 years and has experience with program design, implementation, evaluation, and technical support needs in the community corrections field. She has worked in both juvenile and adult corrections and is familiar with topics facing institutions as well as community-based programs. Julie has successful experience at private companies and within government agencies. She understands the inherent differences of each and has developed the ability to serve as a liaison with those business partners. Julie has connections with key researchers which allow her to stay current with new developments regarding evidence-based practices. Julie is here today to share with us her experiences as director for the Supervision Around the World project, or the SAW project. In a unique partnership, the American Probation and Parole Association and Community Supervision Solutions are working together to chart supervision practices from every country in the world. The SAW project will identify countries offering supervision services, document current practices, build relationships with key administrators, and have developed an interactive internet repository for gleaned program information. Now, the intent of this project is to improve client outcomes worldwide, thereby increasing family and community stability and, of course, public safety. Please enjoy my conversation with Julie Truschel, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show, Julie. Why don't we start off by you telling our audience just a little bit about yourself, your background, maybe some educational and professional milestones, and then we'll do a deeper dive on some of these topics.
That sounds great, Joe. And first of all, thanks so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. So, I grew up on a farm in northern Minnesota. I was one of 9 kids. So with mom and dad there were 11 of us in a 1-bedroom house. So we didn't have a whole lot growing up, but we all learned a really great work ethic, working the farm and being out in the fields and such. And I was the one that decided I really wanted to go to college. And so I moved to Boulder, Colorado in the 80s to attend the University of Colorado. And holy cow, is that a different culture? First time I had really traveled at all. And, as an example, I signed up for an 8 a.m. class, and everyone in the dorm thought I was crazy. Nobody did that in their freshman year. And, I hadn't ever known anyone who'd gone to college, so I didn't know there was this thing called financial aid. And so, all growing up, we'd worked for everything. So I got myself a job in Boulder, and I was the only student in my dorm that was working my way through school. So all of that considered was really odd. So, fitting in took some time there. But I wanted to work with kids in trouble within the criminal justice system. And back then, they did not have criminal justice degrees. So I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in psychology with an emphasis in juvenile deviant behaviors, which sounds pretty odd now. But after I graduated, I started working at the Boulder County Juvenile Detention Center. And back then, the focus was really all about control all the time. And, we did 4-point takedowns and all of those things that were very physical. But then I moved to working with adults in the community and probation and parole. And I worked for the Colorado State Judicial Department for quite some time, supervising juvenile probation. Then I went back to school and I got my master's degree in organizational management. And after that, I just worked with a variety of agencies throughout the criminal justice world.
Julie, I absolutely love the diversity in your resume, which includes some volunteer work you did, acting as a counselor, you noted community corrections, probation officer, and then actually supervisor. And then, of course, all the great work you're doing now, consulting. Let me ask, do you think that avoiding career stagnation, so to speak, is the key to resiliency for corrections professionals and sort of avoiding that staff burnout phenomenon that we're seeing?
Well, for me, all I can speak about really is that staying curious was the key for me. And, really, I just love meeting new people and working with different programs because people really see things, sometimes the exact same things, so differently. And that I find really interesting. And, probably that's something about that psychology background and chicken and the egg around that. But you can learn so much from what other people are doing. And, how they're applying great ideas. And it might be the same great idea, but the application is different, depending on who you talk to or what their purpose is. So, I realize not everyone's able to leave a full-time job with benefits, but you can still find new projects within your own employment or, getting creative needs met with volunteering in your community or working with different populations. And personally, I find that necessary, to stay excited about the work I do. So while I've worked, with juveniles and adults, it's been in different arenas, whether it's institutions or in the community. I've worked with government agencies and private industry, but everything's been about criminal justice and, working to keep people out of the system, whether that's from the prevention end or all the way back to the reentry. And for me, it's been great and provided a lot of different experiences with lots of different programs and personalities. And that's what gets me jazzed up.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I always tell my undergrad students and even new practitioners when they enter the field that one of the nice things about this arena, so to speak, is it does allow folks to move around even within their agencies, whether it's writing pre-sentence investigations or moving from the juvenile world to the adult world, or again, even getting into specific caseloads around interpersonal violence, sex offenders, drunk driving. There really are a lot of opportunities for folks, like you said, to stay fresh and let that curiosity drive them. You eluded the fact that you you sort of left the security of government and got into consulting. We have an expression here in Minnesota reflective of making the decision to leave the security of the public sector and make that leap of faith to the private world. We call it breaking the golden handcuffs because, again, there's that security and it's hard to chase that dream sometime. But talk about your decision and experiences getting into consulting work.
Well, yeah. So around the time I went back and got my master's degree, I was working for Colorado State Judicial, and different people had approached me and asked if I'd help them on certain projects. You know, they couldn't afford a full-time employee, and I didn't necessarily want a whole different job, but it was fun to work on these projects, and they were specialized, and they were hitting that curiosity need I had. So I decided to help them out, and I really liked it, having these different projects at different travel sites. And I just decided to make that leap and work as an independent contractor. And it was really a leap of faith that there would be enough work coming along to pay some of the bills. But it was while doing a gig with the National Institute of Corrections, which I did some work for, that I met Dr. Ed Latessa. And most people know the name Ed Latessa, but getting to know him just changed my world totally. And he had really kindly invited me along during that Ohio halfway house study he had that really set the standard for what works and evidence-based practices. And I got to learn all about those principles from the master, while we were out traveling around Ohio. So from that minute on, I was just banging the drum about evidence-based practices and needing to help people change rather than simply control their behaviors, which had been, my previous work history. So as an example, one of the gigs I was working on was with a supervision agency, and I was auditing their programs. And the outcome of that audit was that, you're doing the right things that your contract requires. You're doing the right 2 times a month peeing in a cup, and 3 times a month doing office visits, and once a month employment checks. All those things are what the contract requires, but they're not the right things to do to actually help people. And so there are so many things that are different now that we know through evidence-based practices. So through those conversations, they actually talked me into taking a full-time job with them, and I redesigned their whole system, which was wonderful and awesome. And I learned so much and got to do cool things. So after that, I worked for federal probation for a while in Washington on their program redesign. But then I really, after that, went back to independent contracting. And that's been my career focus since, is helping agencies understand where they're at with evidence-based practices. And usually starts with an initial audit of some sort. And then I offer recommendations about how they can improve their practices and get better outcomes.
And then fast forwarding a little bit, Julie, in 2017, you become founder and president of Community Supervision Solutions. And then I know that's also tied in with another great project that you're part of, one that is near and dear to my heart. You're now also the director of the SAW project, SAW, and that stands for Supervision Around the World. So maybe tell us about this chapter of your life, so to speak.
Yeah, that is a bit of a story. So hopefully I won't get too lengthy with it here. But, through my career, I'd gotten quite involved with the American Probation Parole Association, the APPA. And I learned that they had an international relations committee, which was really interesting to me. Again, that curiosity. And I'd worked for municipal governments, with counties, with states, with federal. And I was like, hey, there's a next step here to kind of, conclude this progression. So I joined that committee. And throughout our discussions, we always talked about, we need to know what's happening in other countries, what's happening here or there. But there was no vehicle that allowed us to learn what was happening. You just had to go out and search. But unless you knew someone from a specific area, it was really hard to find. So in 2015, there was the World Congress on Probation and Parole that was held in Los Angeles. And it was the second one being held. And APPA was a sponsor, bringing that to the United States, because it's a Congress that would travel the world at different times. So anyway, our team at the International Relations Committee helped design it, and I got to be on that committee to discuss who would be there talking, what they would say, and all that. But I was the chairperson of the committee then, and I was really able to get much closer to some of the administrators of corrections company from other countries and or correctional systems. And so I decided I just started interviewing them. And I got some great interviews from 11 different countries' administration about what they're doing, why they're doing it, what's working well. So as an example, in Japan, and Joe, I don't know if you're familiar with this program, the Volunteer Probation Officer Program. They call it the VPO program of Japan. What I learned at the time is they had 1,000 probation officers in Japan, and they had 80,000 clients under supervision. So we can all do that math, right? The caseload's 1 to 80, right? But those POs did not supervise the clients in Japan. They also had volunteer probation officers, and they had 48,000 of them. So the probation officers supervised the VPOs. The VPOs supervised the clients, and their ratio was 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. And the way they organized the VPOs and the folks they supervised was by geography, so that if you lived next to someone, you were sharing the community and you could really help them reintegrate much more successfully because you knew the same people, you knew the same employers, you were in literally the same geographic area. And what was really cool to me is that these VPOs averaged 65.7 years old. So they were not the young up-and-coming volunteers that we know who are looking to gain experience. They were the folks who were leaving their careers. They were early retirees and really wanted to give back to their communities. So they created relationships with the people they supervised, and they were like revered for their wisdom and their experience and their connections. And they just have this incredible program. So that was just one example. And out of that, there were so many good stories. The APBA asked me to write them up and write up these interviews. And so I did. And they put out a special edition of their journal, Perspectives, that incorporated all of these interviews and highlighted the different practices. And everyone was so interested. So our committee, meanwhile, keeps saying, how can we create a vehicle to share these stories better? And we just couldn't figure out through a nonprofit, without some funding and such. And ultimately in 2017, I just decided I wanted to take this on myself and try and figure out a way to do this. So that's when I designed the Supervision Around the World project. But, I'd never had a formal website even for me in my consulting. So this was like really a new learning curve for sure. And I knew people would need to find out about me a little bit to see if I'm a credible person and what I was doing before I could ever have success with such an international endeavor. So the first step I did was created a business website for Community Supervision Solutions. And that website's at css360.net. And then I talked with the APPA, and we designed a partnership so that we could work together on the SAW project. And we came up with an awesome international advisory board who were just amazing, people from around the globe. And we started getting the word out about that project. So we're working to share information about those successful programs around the world. And, places like countries like Japan who are doing amazing things. And in their case, it's about the volunteer program. But other countries are doing great things too. And you think about Norway's prison system, right? They have amazing success and very low recidivism rates. Or Singapore's Yellow Ribbon Project. And a lot of people have heard about that. Tony Orlando said, tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree. Well, that's the core issue, is helping people to come home successfully, and thus the Yellow Ribbon Project. So I think about, wouldn't it be great to broadcast that information so that people don't have to keep recreating a wheel to get similar good outcomes? And, I think about collaborating and working to improve those outcomes as a larger community rather than this current system and we have of information silos, right? And you and I were talking earlier about sharing information, and this is what I think is really important. And I do get that there are issues of culture and geography, and that's one of the things I hear from folks about, well, the culture of Japan's really different than what we have. But, risk, need, and responsivity tells us that's a responsivity issue, right? Yep, we have to respond to it appropriate to our culture. And so we're really hoping at the SAW Project to improve lives worldwide. And I think everyone can get behind an effort like that brings positive changes to that supervision industry. And the SAW Project is ultimately about helping people stay out of the criminal justice system.
So many things I wanted to comment on there, Julie, but I didn't want to interrupt. When you were talking about the program in Japan and how they leverage their volunteers, yeah, that got me thinking about some of my experiences internationally. And I know I've mentioned this to you offline, and my listeners know about this because I'm in fact promoting next year's international training school on core correctional skills.
Yeah.
But when I was there last year and I met some practitioners from around Europe, I learned of a great program that they have over in the Netherlands where they utilize their volunteers who are now living abroad. So, for example, people from Holland who maybe 20 years ago decided to move to Spain, they become sort of embedded volunteers there. So if people are, and I always think of that television show Locked Up Abroad.
Yeah.
So if there are people who are serving a sentence in another country, they leverage their expats, so to speak, in those countries to visit those people in those prisons and sort of act as a liaison back to the home office, so to speak. But again, it's just an example of innovative ways, and again, taking the various cultural considerations into effect. There's just so much that we could learn from those other systems. In fact, as long as I was talking about the International Training School, again, it's called the International Training School on Core Correctional Skills. It's based on a great book by Professor Ion Dernescu from the University of Bucharest entitled Core Correctional Skills, the Training Kit. But Julie, if you were to look at this, or any evidence-based practitioner would look at that, and you've been mentioning the University of Cincinnati and the great work that Ed Latessa does, you would say, oh, you mean core correctional practices, as we call them? Or again, nobody's really reinventing the wheel on evidence-based practices or R&R. It's just delivered slightly different in these other jurisdictions, but
Right.
It doesn't mean that there's still not great value added that we can learn from their implementation, failures, success, or more to your point, their innovations.
Right. And what I keep thinking about is the applications of specific practices and principles, right? We talk about how to core correctional practices. One of them is, about relationship building, right? Well, based on your culture, that looks really different, And I remember, give an embarrassing story, right? When I was up and coming in the corrections world and working at the juvenile detention facility, I remember an Asian boy came in, sadly we locked him up, and I was talking to him at the time and he kept looking at his shoes. And I remember, and again, embarrassing, saying, look at me when I'm talking to you, because my parents said that to me constantly because eye contact was very important. Now I realize, of course, with decades of experience here, that he was probably being very respectful and culturally appropriate. I just didn't understand. So while those cultural differences exist, it doesn't mean that it's a wrong way to work or that the basic principles still apply. We just apply them differently.
100%, Julie. When you mentioned, again, the key is relationships, and this is a great illustration of how there's sort of more than one way to skin a cat. In Minnesota, where I am, and indeed in other states around the United States, we've gone all in with Miller and Rolnick's motivational interviewing as a means to that end.
Yes.
However, that does not mean that becoming proficient in motivational interviewing, as it's defined by those two brilliant authors, is necessarily the only way to get at that strong working alliance.
Right.
And I think sometimes we get so hung up on the so-called fidelity aspect of it that we lose sight of the forest from the trees.
Right. And, I've heard in working around the nation that there's some concern that folks, just to what you were saying, that there's a model that you can't deviate from, and you must do X, Y, and Z and keep replicating X, Y, and Z because everything's about measurement now, right? Fidelity and measurement and outcomes, and we have to report. And those are all correct things. We have to do that. However, there's also a need to keep curious and keep trying and keep practicing new things, because there are promising practices out there that are looking really good. They just haven't been with us long enough yet to get the outcomes that the researchers need to have. That doesn't mean they might not have them, but if we aren't willing to try new things, we'll never get to that next wonderful new discovery about a program that'll work out great for folks.
And that's really where I am at. And my listeners know this because I preach the gospel of desistance all the time on this podcast. But yes, in the United States, indeed in North America, we have, to our credit, embraced the risk, need, responsivity framework. But I've discovered that's really only examining those pathways into crime and delinquency. And yes, if you extinguish those pathways, you'll see a pretty decent effect size, so to speak, in recidivism. But in the desistance camp, they're focusing on those pathways out of deviance and out of criminality. And what I've discovered is those two things are not mutually exclusive. And again, guilty as charged, Julie, I was such an advocate of, and still am, of the risk needs responsivity framework that I got I developed so much tunnel vision around that I wasn't looking at these other emerging practices until now. Of course, I've gone all in with the assistance. And again, I see that they're not in competition. It's not Coke, Pepsi. They're simply 2 points on a spectrum. And we really need to embrace the entire spectrum for the sake of our clients and our stakeholders and the communities we serve.
Right. And I couldn't agree with you more because, we've already talked, risk is about how you get into the system. The need is what are necessary practices to help you while you're here. And responsivity is how to help you get out in a way that you can understand, right? I mean, there's a story that illustrates this, and you should never use negative stories, but everybody reacts to it. I was auditing a program one time, and they were offering relapse prevention courses, and which is great, right? We know relapse prevention is a really important thing for people who have substance issues and such. And so I sat in on a group. It was in the evening. It was in a school auditorium, and there's nothing wrong with that. And at the entrance, people were paying their $10 or $20, whatever it was, to attend the class, and then they'd go in and take a seat. And then the facilitator of the group went to the front of the auditorium and stood at a microphone, opened a book, and read chapter 4. And then at the end of it, he looked around and said, "Are there any questions?" "Nope." "Okay, sign up, sign your way out." And so they had attendance of who was there. And there was no interaction. There was no learning. It was just, talking at someone rather than with someone. There was no skill building. And the worst thing, Joe, the thing that is so illustrative, a large number of those people were monolingual Spanish speakers. So they literally couldn't even understand what was said. But yet the judge who had ordered them to the program was receiving documentation that they had gone through this program and successfully completed. And it was all just based on attendance and payment of that $10, whatever. So you talk about responsivity. we fell down with these folks that, I gave the example of, because they did not get their needs met in any way by attending those classes. So we want to give assistance to people who need it in a manner that they can understand and that meets their needs.
Yeah, the old butts in the seats metric that always drives me crazy. Do we have butts in the seats equals success?
Yes.
But as we know, that's not always the case. Hey, I want to double back to the SAW project a little bit. And you mentioned a web link earlier, which I will leave that web link in the episode description of this podcast. And I'll also leave the link for the SAW project. In particular, Julie, I was really delighted to see how you took those sort of 2-minute vignettes or testimonials and broke them down. I'm going to put myself on the spot here between, I believe it was client, practitioner, and administrator maybe. But again, I'll leave a link to that. But can you maybe highlight for the listener what they'll see when they go to that website?
Absolutely. No, thank you for bringing that up. So one of the ways we wanted to share good things, because we really want the SAW project to be about positive stories, things you can do, things you can try, maybe look at things a little bit differently. So we decided that there are generally 3 areas that people struggle with. And that might be, just a challenge within supervision, or, it'd be good to hear a motivational story at some point, or perhaps you've heard of a program that's really successful and not everyone knows about it or has heard about it. So we were able to interview actually 4 classes of folks, one being clients who have gone through the system, one are direct supervising agents, one is administrators who oversee programs, and then the final is just all other folks, whether it's police officers or judges or people who work in the system but aren't about direct supervision. So we asked them, what's a challenge you might have overcome? And we got some of the best stories. We have over 80 videos now on there from a variety of folks, and I'd really love it if people checked it out.
Yeah, like I said, I'll leave that link right within the description of this podcast episode, so folks can just look on their phone or their tablet or their PC or where they're listening and just go ahead and click right on that link. Julie, you mentioned APPA, which is a fantastic organization, and some of the work you're doing with them. You mentioned the International Relations Committee. Can you maybe share some more of those highlights with the listeners, or anything else, again, to steer folks in the direction of APPA?
Oh, please, yes, thank you. So we have a great international team who's worked to bring international topics to the APPA members. And I mentioned that special editions of Perspectives that was published back in 2016 from the World Congress interviews. And our team just finished up sponsoring 2 additional special editions of Perspectives. And these related to international restorative justice programs. They were just amazing. It was a topic we wanted to address. And the first was accomplished in 2021, their summer edition. But we had so many great submissions. We actually had another special edition, which was the 2022 spring edition. So as an example, the Czech Republic, they've just redesigned their entire probation system, and they now call it the Probation and Mediation Services, because they really want to focus on restorative practices and repairing the harm rather than just punishing people and supervising them throughout. So there's some great articles in there to check out. And we're also committed to getting international speakers to the APPA training institutes. So this summer in Chicago, we're hosting 2 different workshops. One is with a group from the Parole Board of Canada, who will come in and talk about gender parole and how they work successfully with women within their system. And then also the Prem Rawat Foundation has a workshop talking about the Peace Education Program. And if you haven't heard about it, it's an amazing program. It's been used in over 72 countries in 30 languages with 250,000 people. And it's online. It's offered through video-based workshops, and it's free. It's free in all these languages, and it's hard to say that there's not the value there. But we'll have international speakers there on site on a panel that talk about using this program and what their experience has been, both locally and globally. So that'll be a good one. And then part of our committee is also working to get more information out there to the APP members about international issues. And Patricia O'Hagan of Core Systems out of Belfast is actually leading the effort, and she's creating for us a communications plan using APPA Connect. So that's on their website. There's a lot going on, and it's really exciting to be a part of that. And Joe, I got to give you a plug. I'm so excited you've agreed to join our team with the International Relations Committee.
Thank you very much. Glad to be a part of it. And note to self, I've got to get Patricia on the show as a guest now as well. Exactly. Lots of links for me to be including in this episode, including APPA links. And again, I'll continue to plug, as you just did, their summer conference coming up in August of 2022, rather. Hey, what is on the horizon for you, Julie? If I've got you back on the show in 5 years, look into your crystal ball, what do you think we'll be talking about?
Well, what I am really hoping to is that we're going to be talking about the success of the SAW project. And it would be so awesome to have a platform where agencies and individuals can collaborate on improving these program outcomes from around the world. And as an example, if I wanted to work with Indigenous women and successfully shorten their supervision in the community, work with them in specific ways, and maybe I could come to that SAW project website and see who's getting great outcomes in that arena. And perhaps there will be a contact person from the Parole Board of Canada who would be listed, because we already know right now that they're doing great things with that population of women. And can you imagine a platform that would allow working groups to interact and maybe provide translation, share their experiences of best practices? Perhaps we could create a global team to address a current issue that's out there. And, we all know that mission-driven teams like this are more effective because you bring different ideas, perspectives, and talents to those specific issues. And when you get more people involved who have different perspectives, you just come to these unique and wonderful places. And if we could do that online and take out those barriers that we all worry about and the silos that were mentioned earlier, it would be amazing. So this was all, the SAW project is really with the intent to keep people out of institutions, and we're still holding them accountable for any crimes. Don't make me think, or hear that I'm saying we're soft on crime, but we want to support them in being with their families, raising their kids, holding jobs, paying taxes, all of those things that are important. And we could, at the SAW Project, be that platform that improves criminal justice outcomes around the world. And now that would be a really cool legacy to be involved with.
Julie, if you would, tell us some of those next steps that you envision to get to your sort of utopian place with the SAW Project. What might that look like? Yeah,
well, we've gone through the first course of funding to create our SAW Project website. And as you so kindly mentioned, it's sawproject.org. We hope everyone goes to check it out. But we've gotten the word out there for promotions, and we do have social media staff. So we're on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all those. So the first phase is in place, but we're really ready to enter that phase 2 that will help us set up a system to collect data, the actual data of the different countries in the world. And for that, we really need some funding. So for the next steps, we're hoping for institutional funding, like grants, whether philanthropic or foundation support, and maybe involvement from like-minded agencies that actually have similar missions of connecting people, collaborating, and fixing some of the issues out there, specifically in criminal justice or social issues. So, of course, we'd appreciate any donations from any source. We have a place on our website where you could do that. But that's really the next step. And more information can be found at our website at sawproject.org.
And again, I will leave that link in the show notes of this very episode, Julie. Julie Truschel of the SAW Project, Supervision Around the World, based out of Denver, Colorado. Thank you so much for being on the Criminologist podcast, and we hope to have you back very soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. I really do appreciate it very much.
All right, we'll talk soon, Julie. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Again, don't forget to check out those links in the episode description of this program, including information on the SAW project, as well as Julie's own consulting firm, Community Supervision Solutions 360, as well as a very helpful link for the American Probation and Parole Association, APPA. Check out all those links. Okay, there will be another link in the episode description entitled Become a Supporter. If you are interested in supporting the program and helping offset some of our overhead cost, you can simply click on that link to learn details of how you can support the program for as little as $3 a month, or you can save some money by opting to become a yearly supporter. Again, simply a way for you to show your appreciation for the program. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, implementation, or of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have any questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show directly through our email of thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New, fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. Merchandise is available. Reach out if interested. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast. And of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
Holy cow, is that a different culture?
Finland, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Romania, Spain, Sweden, Belgium, France, India. Happy to have you all with us today.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.